So I found a story about this couple driving through the country road. They've been driving for several miles, and they had gone without saying a single word to each other for a while. They had this earlier discussion that led to an argument, and neither one of them was willing to concede their position. So they continued on. The tension was building. The silence was in the car. Finally, they passed this farm with a bunch of mules and goats and cows all out in the field. And the husband looked over at his wife and says rather sarcastically, "Oh, would those be relatives of yours?" The wife replied, "Yes, they are. They're my in-laws." So there you go. Perhaps you're aware that we have Wilmot Properties in our room downstairs. You may not. I keep getting asked about the sign out front because it says Wilmot Properties there. And so they're keeping an office downstairs as a part of that's Craig and Marilyn's business. And this last week I was helping them with some tech stuff. They had gone to a new phone system. And we're using a voice over internet phone system, and it's a great system that offers a lot of great business tools. But there was a problem that we have been working on for maybe 2 months. I don't know. It's been kind of this ongoing thing, and we've been trying to reset it. We've been changing out cables. We've been trying to check how it is linking into our computer system and all this kinds of stuff. We've just kind of been going over and over and over. And finally, this last week, when I talked with him, the conversation led to the fact that it's probably defective equipment that we started with. It's never worked properly because there's a problem in the equipment. So they finally determined and were willing to send us out the new piece that we need, and then it arrived a day or two later. We got it installed, and magically it just seemed to fix every issue, and it fixed all the problems, and now everything's working just fine as far as I know. I don't know how. We'll see how it goes next week. But you've probably experienced similar issues where you deal with that frustration of life that things are supposed to work a certain way, but they don't. Things are supposed to go a certain way, but they don't. Things are, expected to happen a certain way, and they don't. And life is just not working the way that you expect it to or expect that it should. Maybe you bought something at the store, got it home, and there were missing parts. Something on it was broken, or maybe it just didn't work altogether. Maybe you've been to the doctor who said, "Try this. It should fix the issue. It should help you out. It should take care of the problem," but it doesn't. Maybe you've helped a friend with wisdom and advice. They came to you. You shared your feelings. They went home and did the exact opposite. I get that from time to time. You're on your way home from work, it's dinner time, you go stop at McDonald's or wherever, you get dinner for the family, you get home, you open the bag, and it's all wrong. Right? We've all been there at these times when life didn't go the way we thought that it should. Have you seen any of these? You only had one job to do photos. They're pretty fun, and I found some. It was hard to narrow it down. I probably have way too many, but I was going to share a few of them with you this morning. So there's the first one, and I will admit, I did have to look at that for a little while and go, now what is wrong with the picture? I'm not picking up on it yet. But yeah, SCH should have been that way. How about the next one? There you go. Missed the line, the painting a little bit. Apparently that guy went on break and the truck kept on going. I don't know. That one's a little hard to see, but the stairs are going down and the handrail's going up. You had one job to do. There you go. Bit of a reach. Right. There you go. You had one. American flag, and it says made in China. There you go. Left turn, and the sign goes to the right. What else? One more, maybe. Oh, the heart. Can you see back in the, kind of in the middle left, there's one Pepsi bottle amidst all the packaged up bottles of Coca-Cola. So somebody goofed up that one. Oh yeah, there you go. I love that one. They couldn't come up with couldn't remember, what? It's on the tip of my tongue. What are those things called? Anything else? Is that okay, there you go. There's the last one. Oh, there was just so many of them that were just hilarious. What if God is looking down on us and said, I gave you one job to do. Are you doing it? Are you fulfilling that job? Are you living out the purpose that He has for your life? What if God would say to us, your life is not working the way I designed it? And isn't that what we're talking about these last few weeks in identity? God has created a design for us, a plan and a purpose, a way of how to be and how to live. And what if God would look down upon us and say, I designed it, I gave you the purposes for you to live out. I have said who you can become, and I have said what I'd like you to do. But what if He looks down upon us and our life is just not working the way He wants, the way He's designed it to be, the way it ought to be? At the beginning of our 40-day journey to identity, we looked at Genesis 1 and noticed that there were two things that happened at creation. We said that when God created us, He gave mankind identity, and He gave mankind authority. And we didn't talk about the second piece very much. It was being saved, actually, for today. But the Bible said that God created man in His own image. That's identity. He says that He made us like Him. He gave us an image. He gave us an identity. And then He said to them, go out, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. That's an issue of authority. And so He says, I want to say who you are, and then I have a say in what you're to do. And God gave us both of those things. But we also said that sin entered the world. And when that happened, both of those things were broken. Both of those issues were lost. And honestly, in our lives, because we still deal with sin, because we still deal with the flesh, both of those things have been broken in us as well. And so for the last 4 weeks, we've been talking about repairing, recovering, and rebuilding our broken identity. What does it look like? How can we step back into the identity that God has for us? And to help us begin thinking about this one last time, where we're going to go is a relationship between those two things. And I mentioned this for me started a year ago when we did the Covenant and Kingdom series. And we said that God gave us covenant, which is identity, and then He gave us the kingdom responsibility, which is purpose and authority. And so here's a couple ways to look at that. If you'd go down, covenant can go the next one. It's about relationship with God and responsibility to God. It's about who I am, and then it's also about what I'm here for. It's about identity and it's about purpose. One is about being, the other is about doing. One that we're saved, one is about that we're sent. What am I saved from and what have I been saved for? These are all words and language that we've used over and over and over at different times. And we're just trying to connect all these. And so the first one, identity, is more of that internal. Who does God say that I am? And today what we're going to talk about is the external. What is God telling me to do? And how can we live into that? There's other ways we can look at that, but that's good enough for now. The point is that as we're living into God's identity, then we also begin to live into God's authority. And it's the reason for which we've been created. Today we've been discussing our identity crisis, and so I want to suggest to you this morning that we also have an authority crisis. Just as we struggle with who we are, just as we struggle with insecurity or fear or shame, we also struggle in this area of what are we supposed to do? Am I confident and able to represent God in the world? That's really what it's about. It's who does God say that I am? That's identity. But then how can I represent God in the world around me? That's the piece of authority. And it too, just like identity, has been broken. And we've lost that piece. And we struggle in that piece in doing this well. And so we want to begin recapturing the purposes that God has for us. Now, I want to take a short break and share a video clip with you. This was recommended to me, and I found it very interesting. You'd be glad to know it's an interview with quarterback Tom Brady, one of our fans around here at Fellowship. I warned Grayson ahead of time. I told him, but it's an interview with Tom Brady, and here's the interesting piece I hope you connect. I'm going to probably get the year wrong. I think this was 2006, 2005, somewhere in there. It's a 60-minute interview, and even at that point, he had won 2 or 3 championships. He was making millions of dollars a year. He had so many endorsements, he had to figure out which ones he wanted to take and which ones he wanted to decline. Tom Brady has a supermodel for a wife. He's got all the fame and prestige that anyone could ever achieve. I mean, by every worldly standard that we might possibly look at, he's a guy that's arrived. And yet in this interview, it's really funny, or at least it's really interesting, when he kind of admits, or he kind of just says, but it seems like there ought to be more. And so if we could catch the lights and let's take a look.
Tom Brady, the quarterback of the New England Patriots, is not only one of the NFL's best players, he's one of the NFL's great stories. At the tender age of 30, he has already won 3 Super Bowls, an accomplishment that ranks him with some of the best quarterbacks ever to play the game. And he's having one of the greatest seasons in pro football history. When we first reported on him back in 2005, he seemed underrated and almost overlooked. He doesn't have the arm of Peyton Manning, and he doesn't have tattoos, and he doesn't take steroids, and he's never held out for more money. All he knows how to do is win. This is what you always wanted.
You're right. You're right. It has. And I didn't think it came with all the other baggage, though.
In addition to his success on the field and his sex appeal off it, there is also the $60 million 10-year contract to play with the Patriots.
I mean, I'm making more money now than I ever thought I could ever make playing football.
But with all that money, fame, and career accomplishments, we were surprised to hear this from him.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is... Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this.
What's the answer?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
So do 4 rings answer that question? 5 rings answer that question? Another $1 million? Another $60 million? Will any of those things answer that question? I think we understand that it doesn't, which is good news for us because not many of us will probably ever have those chances. But we could be encouraged because God has made us for things that are so much more important. God has made us for things that really do matter and really satisfy. They're still hard. They're still difficult. They still require a lot of time, effort, and sacrifice. But they are the things that matter. And they're the things that we've been created for. And it's only when we deny that, it's only when we fail to live into that, it's only when we don't work towards the reasons that we've been created that that emptiness continues. So I want to take us this morning to Galatians chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. And there's a really great section in Ephesians 2 that I wanted to teach from. I thought it actually did a better job of talking about this issue. But we had just gone through Ephesians, and Mark did a great job talking through that chapter back several weeks. And he kind of laid out, what happens when a relationship with God is broken and sin enters in and all that. But then he got into the second part is, but then when we recapture that and we're forgiven and we're made a part of the family, then we get to start living into purpose. And so I wanted to instead come here, Galatians 6, chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. And it says, let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are the household of the faith. Every Christ follower is to do good to everyone. We cannot stop doing good. We cannot give up on doing good. We cannot grow weary of doing good. We don't take a break from doing good. We don't give up on doing good. I want to kind of throw in there to think about this. Maybe we should even be careful about the complaining that we sometimes do in the doing good. We're going to keep talking about Shem. I know that we ask and ask and ask, and I know we're given effort after effort. I know that we're, bringing that before you over and over, and we're just so committed that God has given us this opportunity. And so we don't want to give up on the doing good. It's difficult. It feels like a lot of work. We're asking for sacrifice, but it makes a kingdom impact. And so we remain committed to it. It's the reason we were created. Doing good is how we answer the question, what am I here for? We're not here for Super Bowl rings and millions of dollars. We're not here for hours on end watching television or eating out or hanging out at the local store, whatever. I mean, we are here for the purpose of doing good. We can try to answer the question through money and success. We can try to answer this question through creating influence, recreation, looking good. We can try to do it through recognition, but none of those things will ever satisfy. They're all still tied to identity. And we try to find these things, we try to find identity through these things. It doesn't work. So we try to find purpose in these things. It still doesn't work. And so we have to ask then, what does? Why? The identity question asks, who am I? And the purpose question asks, what am I here for? And we have to press into that question and ask, what am I doing? Why am I here? What does God have for me? Well, let me suggest that here's how this works. And again, just a brief summary or revisiting of the identity triangle. If you'd go up there, Trevor, we said that God the Father just gives us identity. He tells us he loves us. Through his grace, he says he accepts us and he wants to be with us and have a relationship with us. He includes us in his family. He gives identity to us. And then with that identity, because we understand he loves us, we can trust him, we begin to surrender our life to him more and more. And we talked about that last week. We've talked a lot about what it looks like to try to reverse the flow, if you will, what it looks like to go the other way when we think that we can earn God's favor through obedience and works, and just how that doesn't work. The same thing is true with, similar things are true with our purpose. Trevor, did I make another triangle? We have a king. We have a king that is over his kingdom. And he says, I give you authority to represent me in the world. He told Adam and Eve to go out, fill the earth, and subdue it. He just gave them the job. You have the authority to go and do that, he says. That's what I want you to do. Take authority over representing my interest in stewarding my things on earth. And then as we do that, we begin to step into power. And we see godly things happen around us. But authority then is because it's been given to us by God. And, random thought. I wonder what it looks like to go the other way on this triangle. I think some of us give up on the authority because we don't see the power. But I'll think about that more later on. Sorry. So this is about the confidence of representing God in the world around us. We struggle in that, just like we might struggle in shame and identity, sometimes we struggle in the confidence to represent God in the things that we're involved with. I have a 6th grade boy that I've been mentoring over at Whitman School as a part of our feeding program that we've been in. And I meet with him once a week, and he started playing basketball and was really interested in me coming and watching his basketball games. And so I went to a basketball game, and 6th grade basketball is really kind of interesting. They're not quite playing the swarm ball anymore, where they're all huddled around the ball, and they just got this pack of kids kind of going, like in soccer and basketball, so they just kind of wander all around together. So they're starting to spread out. They're starting to learn skills. They're passing, they're dribbling, they're shooting, they're doing all this stuff. And I noticed there was kind of 3 different types of boys that were out there. There were some boys, they were actually pretty good. They were growing in their skills. They wanted the ball. They could shoot. They could make baskets. They could make things happen. There was a few of those. Some of the boys were pretty oblivious to how bad they really were. And they didn't really care. They loved to get the ball, and they would just go running with it and taking off, and they would just launch it kind of wildly up into the air and see if it happened to go in the hoop. And they were kind of cute that way, but they were also making these wild shots, double dribbling, traveling, making a lot of mistakes. And they didn't really care. They're just out there having fun. Then there was what I perceived, at least of the kids I was watching, the majority of the kids fell into a 3rd category. They really wanted to be on the team. They really wanted to be accepted as a part of all the other boys. They really wanted to be good, but they had no confidence that they were any good. And they would really do interesting things. They loved to run up and down the court with all the guys. They love to do easy jobs, like be the kid on the sideline that throws the ball in. They could do that. But anything else, they just didn't really want to have much to do with it. They were almost running around behind other kids. They were almost they were almost not looking the right way. They were almost afraid that the ball might actually get passed to them, and then they have to figure out what to do with it. And I found it so interesting to watch them like this. And my little guy was like that. And when I was mentoring him in the school, he was talking to me about how good he was and how good his team was. And he talked about he would tell me how he likes to trash talk the other kids. He told me about how he's learned stuff from his older brothers, all this kind of stuff. And then out on the court, there was just no confidence at all. And he did not want that ball. I don't think he got the ball one time, or if he did, he quickly passed it off to one of the good kids as soon as he could do it. I think there's Christians that are a lot like that. Some have the skills to represent Christ in the world. Some are not concerned with getting better at it, and they frankly don't care. Then there's, I think, a large majority of people in the church that call themselves Christian. They're beginning to develop that identity as a Christian, but they don't have any confidence in being able to represent God in the world around them. It's been my experience that a vast majority of the Christians kind of fall into that 3rd category. They either feel ill-prepared or even embarrassed to represent God, to say, I'm a Christian, to say, this is who I think Christ is. Here's some of the things that I hear rather frequently. People will tell me things like all the time, I don't know how to pray out loud. Could you do that? People will tell me things like, I don't really understand what the Bible says, so I don't read it very much or I don't share it. I don't know how to answer questions about my faith or about God. I'm just not a teacher. I'm not a good teacher. I can't share this with other people. I just don't know what to say. Some people flat out say, you know what, I'm just not an example of a good Christian. It's better that we just keep that under wraps until I get better. And we lack a sense of authority that God has given to us that says, walk out into this world and stand for me. Represent me. Be confident in me. You can represent me in the world, and I am calling you, I'm asking you, I'm charging you. I know you can do it. Because understand, it's authority that's given to you. Again, we don't earn it. Again, we don't have to show our abilities. Just as an identity is something that God gives to us, and God gets to tell us who we are, God gets to tell us what we can do. And we can boldly and confidently stand in His presence and stand in the world and say, I can represent, because He said that I can do that. It's a common feeling amongst Christians that they often feel like they don't know how or they cannot represent Jesus. And so it kind of took me back to that connection that this is a problem that's gone way back. I mean, remember back to the people that Jesus was teaching, and they were amazed at Him. In Matthew 7, it said the crowds were amazed at His teaching because He taught as one who had authority and not like the teachers of the law. All their other leaders at the time, I don't know what exactly they saw differently, but they just recognized that Jesus stood in authority that nobody else seemed confident to stand in. Of course, Jesus could. He's secure in His identity. He knew who He was. He knew He was the Son of God, and it was easy for Him to stand in the authority that God had given Him when He came to earth. And He gives us the opportunity to do the same thing, to stand in authority and just represent Him in our life. Now, the second part of that is not only the authority and the confidence, but it's the power. And let me share with you how this is connected. Notice the next two triangles. The first one's the identity triangle we've been talking about, and the second one is the authority triangle that I just kind of shared with you. And we need to see how they're connected. As the Father gives us identity and we begin to step into that identity, when we become more secure in who God says we are, then we can begin to step over into authority and say, I can represent Him. Likewise, as identity helps us to surrender to the Lord and to begin to walk in obedience, that obedience helps us to start walking in the power that sees real change and real things happen. So authority is about representing God. Power is about seeing that when we represent Him, godly things take place. Godly things happen. And so let's talk about that second part, that power part. How can we walk in the power of God to see actual transformation take place in the world around us? How can we walk in that power? Well, first of all, we have to step into obedience. If we don't step into obedience, we can't have access to the power. In practical terms, what does that look like? What am I saying? Am I saying that once I surrender everything to God, I suddenly start glowing blue because I've got the power? Lightning, like Thor, I can wield the lightning of God? Well, there's some really practical things here. Christians are simply not seeing the power of God at work in their life because their life is not available to Him. They haven't surrendered. They don't give themselves over to the Lord, so they can't see the power taking place. If we're struggling with sin or with pride or with selfishness or other areas of surrender, then how can God use us? There's a limit to the power that can flow out of our lives because we haven't given ourselves to him. We're missing out on the calling. We're unfulfilled in our purposes. We're not seeing the power of God flowing through our lives for the transformation in the world that can take place. Because what happens when you surrender your finances to God? Suddenly a child at Shem is sponsored and a life is saved. What happens when you surrender your time to God? Suddenly a ministry is able to grow a little bit more. What happens when you surrender your attitude to God? Suddenly he can use you to love other people and make a difference in their life. What happens when you surrender your priorities to God? Suddenly you start bringing friends to church. What happens when you surrender your sin to God? Suddenly your life starts working the way he intended it to. So there's a lot of areas where when we start surrendering to him and wanting more and more of him in our life, we are able to live into the power that sees things happen. We can make a difference in the world and see the power of God flow through us. Then there's some really exciting things that begin to take place too. Because those are practical things, there's a spiritual side as well. And what does it look like when we begin excuse me, last week we talked about going up those steps of surrender and what that kind of looks like in our life. And you notice a lot of those too are kind of practical steps. And then some of those later steps are more spiritual steps. And what happens when we start walking into those most spiritual areas of life and we deepen and grow deeper and deeper in our relationship with God? We're praying more. We're fellowshipping more. We're reading his word more. We're trusting in him more. And we recognize that we are walking in the very presence of God to serve him in the world around us. Amazing things begin to happen and we start to access and be a part of a totally new area of God's power. And again, I'm not talking about any really strange, weird things at all. But I am saying that when we pray, God moves. I will say that when we speak, it can change lives. And I will say that when we read the Word of God, we begin to gain truth and clarity and deeper understanding. And we can help bring transformation into the world because we're living in the power, God's power, and not our own. So, where are you at in this journey? What has kind of come up in you? What are you learning through this process of gaining identity? Are you still struggling in that area of identity and knowing who God says you are and how to live in his presence and in his leading and to live in what he says about you? Are you still struggling there? And you want to continue to press in on that. We've got, 2 weeks before Easter? So there's just a couple of weeks of pressing into this idea of identity, spending some time with God every day. You have your prayer calendars. You have a new verse this week. I didn't bring one up, so you read it. I'm not going to read it to you. You have to do that on your own. Keep that verse somewhere to let it remind you of the power that God has for you, the challenge to continue doing good works for him in the world around you. If you'd like to take that next step of what does it look like for me to grow in authority and grow in purpose, that I could actually start living my life, functioning in my life the way God has created me to do it, that it might help me grow in the area of identity. They're connected. God says, this is who I am, and now he's telling me, so this is what I can do. And if you could start living in that identity, and you could start living out in that authority and purpose, it is amazing to let God use your life for the things that he has just for you to do. And so whatever the piece is, don't let the identity be a stumbling block. Don't let the authority be a stumbling block. Begin to move into those things. Deepen that walk with the Lord. Spend your time in your devotions and prayer and reading and letting that calendar remind you of what God says about you and what God says you can do. That's the idea of it. It's just about us being reminded by God, because He's the one that gives it to us in the first place. We've got to let Him pour it into our lives, reminding us of who we are, that we can live for Him. And then as He does that, we can begin surrendering our life to Him and living out in the purposes that He has for us. So is your question today a question of identity, or is it a question of purpose? And what does it look like for you to take the next step that God has for you? And we'll talk further about that next week. Would you join me as we close in prayer?